driving back from my little vacation with my daughters. Of course, I had to go through Philadelphia, and if I was going through Philadelphia, I was going to stop at Northview Gardens. And as I got out, ready to start filming, I noticed this sweet little area that I hadn't seen before. Very formal with the clipped boxwood and this beautiful, very European-looking fountain right here next to the house. And I thought, maybe I'll do water features like the lake. Here's the lake, the larger body of water with the beautiful pond and how beautiful siding. And this one they refer to as the pond by the Rose Cottage, a sweet little wild-looking one, and a little grotto type of waterfall, and the whimsical little water fountain in the children's garden. Oh, that's it. I'm going to focus on water features. So I thought, I'm going to head out and I'm going to go over and I'm going to start with the lake. That's what I'm going to do. But, the best laid plans get laid aside. That this is the front approach. You come in through the gate here. And I decided I would just walk over and, of course, take a video of it as I was going. And when Jenny was showing me through the gardens before, she showed me these raised beds here that are very sunny and a little bit drier, where she was trying to grow some things, that she had seen 20 years ago when she was in the south of France, and it was too wet, and so she raised the beds to keep them a little drier. And I'm like, oh, I got distracted by this beautiful tree. Is that like a tricolor beach or something? And this is the drier area. I'm going to get a video of this. The beautiful lake here. Looks like some gara. And I hadn't seen this before. Some little chicks and hens, which in our first home in Colorado, I'd never seen chicks and hens before. And so I was always fascinated by those. Looks like maybe some irises and some more sage and different ground covers growing in here. And some really interesting leaves. I'm not sure what that is. But of course, I always want to know what they are. And if Jenny were here, she'd tell me. But as I look up over the rocks, there's some columbine. And of course, this little man-made stream reminds me of our stream in Colorado and all the beautiful things growing. And I like to look at notice the mosses and other plants. Looks like there's ferns and all kinds of interesting things growing around the rocks. And, the beautiful sound of falling water. Here's some, I think this is anise hyssop, which I sometimes confuse. Unless I can actually crush the leaves, sometimes I have a hard time telling what things are, because it looks a lot like sage, and they are in the same family, so that's my excuse. They're in the same family. And as we get to the lake, you can see the koi. And I'm loving seeing the different plants that bloom at different times of the year. So I know that this must be absolutely beautiful in the spring and in the fall. And out of the corner of my eye, I catch the gentian. And I had seen a picture of it in Glorious Shade, Jenny's book on the shade gardening. And the flower is beautiful, but I wasn't prepared for how beautiful they are in mass. And the flowers don't open. And still bees can wiggle their way into it. And the different texture for the leaves, maybe that might be some Solomon seal and some ferns. I'm just not sure what all of this is, but it's absolutely beautiful. And these look like some seed heads. I love looking back. Now, my problem is I want to stop and identify everything. But what I really need to do is I need to pull back and I need to look at the vista. I have to discipline myself. There's some epimedium there, some little violets, all kinds of things. That's what I want to do. And, before I start filming, I see this all the time, but I want to make sure that I show you how absolutely exquisite the sighting is. This is what Jenny does so well. That's the landscape architecture. The individual plants, that's the horticulture. And that she does both of those things. And it shows up so beautifully in the sighting of everything and then the exquisite nature of the individual plants. And, here we are, it's midday and it's shady here in this spot. Again, so well designed. And here we are, looking at the little koi. I guess it brings out the child in all of us to want to watch the fish. And again, considering how lush everything is, you can tell she's done a good job of keeping this area dry so a different type of plant can grow. She uses a lot of gravel. She says the seeds sprout really well in it. Now, I do not know what's happening. If you're a koi, I'm not sure what exciting thing is occurring, but that's where they like to hang out. And again, this beautiful vista back towards the house and up the little waterfall area. Looks like some dianthus that would be beautiful in the springtime. I'm not sure what all of that is. Some of these older trees that are absolutely wonderful. This house, this entire land was owned by a man who published the Farm Journal. He and his family bought this in 1887, and they imported a lot of Japanese maple trees. Now, this is funny. Throughout the garden, you'll see containers, galvanized things that say weed on them. So you don't have to go look for something to place to your weeds in. It's right there. Beautiful ferns and moss. And I love walking through a beautiful wooded shade garden with all the ferns and the trees. And you can see the stumps there. They intentionally leave the stumps for a stumpery, very English thing to do. And the trees that have fallen, and they lose trees pretty regularly because it's a very active forest, and they leave them on the side to decompose. It fertilizes the soil, gives animals and insects a good place to live. It's just a natural way for a garden to grow. This magnificent tree, I cannot see the top of it because of the leaf canopy, but it's an oak, and I'm assuming it's a white oak. And then all kinds of plants growing here, covering the ground. The one thing I do recognize is some hibiscus. And I think there's some brunnera, some hellebores. And here is a leatherleaf viburnum, and the birds enjoy those berries. And this is actually the edge of the property, but I know they have squirrels because that looks like some dead oak branch from a squirrel nest. And there's our viburnum again. And that looks like some kind of a mophead hydrangea, maybe. Maybe some heucheras and some hostas. And there's another container for weeds. I love it. Not sure what happened to that tree. It looks like he had a hard time. Then back here is the play area for the children. Jenny talks about when they first moved in, 26 years ago, her kids were young, and so she would garden while they played here. So this was the area that she first started gardening. And I have seen pictures earlier in the summer of this area with the these hydrangeas in full bloom. A little whimsy there with a wind chime and other fun things hanging there to create a fun area for adults or older children to sit. This looks like maybe might be a panicle hydrangea, maybe a limelight. And this is, well, there's some hostas that are the late blooming ones. And this is a mophead hydrangea. And the lace cap hydrangeas here, you can tell they bloomed earlier. They turn into this deeper rosy color as they age, which is still very, very beautiful. So it's a flower that lasts really a long time, giving a lot of beauty over multiple weeks. And back through the area, again, you can see the whimsy that Jenny has, the elephant balancing the ball. And no, he's not holding a pencil in his mouth. That is Jenny's garden designs, her pencil. I'm not sure quite where that came from. I'm sure there's a story that goes with that. And there's a little frog playing a bass, and a fairy, and a little, looks like maybe a cat on top of the train. And what you're seeing in the background is the formal front lawn that we looked at 2 weeks ago. And there's a little seating area. And as we go through here, well, we have to stop and look for a minute at our funny little elephant, and a little close-up of that panicled hydrangea, and a little woven birdhouse. Again, just a little glimpse back through the play area. And as we walk past the hydrangeas, we see the shade garden. It's a true shade garden here. This looks like some lobelia and some Japanese painted fern and beautiful hardy begonia. Hers is just barely beginning to bloom. There's hosta, and here is the backside of those hydrangeas, the mophead ones, and there's the blooms on the begonia. There was some berries on the holly, a little red bud, and as we look past, there's the organics bin. Again, a working garden, and what we see in the distance is the Rose Cottage. And you can see the magnificent yellow flowers here in late summer blooming. But of course, from this angle, Jenny loves pink. And this huge, tall cluster of pink flowers is several different types of flowers. So this one right in front of us, that is a Joe Pye weed. Up tall, that really tall one, that's ironweed. And down low, and back there, well, it's not really low, but those are the garden phlox. And there are a couple of different varieties of garden phlox. There's a little yellow sneezeweed in there. But this one has a smaller flower petal. Looks very much like a lilac to me. And then there are some of the phlox with the larger petals. And down, that is the close-up of the ironweed. And these flowers are on this descent. This is what it looks like when it's kind of actively blooming.
Really pretty.
So it's, a bigger flower than what we're seeing here. But even at the end, it maintains that really deep pinkish, purplish color. It's so beautiful. Now, here is our little close-up of our Mr. B having a nice snack from the garden phlox, but you can see this has been underplanted with daylilies. So even before the phlox and everything blooms here, there are daylilies blooming in this garden. That's the beautiful design that comes when there's just a succession of interesting things blooming in the garden. And those pinks and yellows and blues that, the three primary colors really give it a sense of completion. And as you look over here, this looks like some blue lobelia growing here with the yellow rudbeckia and a little bit of the garden phlox, the pink of the garden phlox, and the cleome. And then over here, the window boxes on the cottage. These are a type of begonia I've never seen, but I know it's a begonia because I recognize that seed head. And also within this beautiful box, looks like some diamond frost euphorbia, some scabiosa, some trailing lobelia, some Johnny jump ups. There's some nicotiana and the sneezeweed over here on the side, and the black-eyed Susan, the rudbeckia, and there is the pond. This garden has very much a feel of an English cottage, informal kind of a feel, and a lot of whimsy in this area if you look around. Now I can see other things, probably some irises that were blooming here earlier, and you see the skeleton of a tree that has died, but it adds some really architectural, structural interest to the garden. You don't have to cut everything else out when it dies. And looking back towards the window boxes on the Rose Cottage, and it is a functioning garden shed. They actually work in there. And you can see where the irises were. Now, when I was here earlier, I heard a sound. I said, "What bird is that?" And they said, "No, that's our frog." So I love a good play on words. So all others will be towed. That appeals to my sense of whimsy. And the beautiful blue colors echoing the blue in the cottage painting. And a little bird bath in there too. And it's not just a pond, it has a little bit of a stream with a little bit of a waterfall here. Kind of a beautiful grotto type of an area with maybe a weeping fir or spruce of some type. I can't tell unless I touch whether it's a spruce or a fir. And some other plants growing in there. And looking back towards the cottage. You can see some heucheras growing in there. Now this is looking back towards the house. This is the fence going into the cottage garden. I'm sorry, the kitchen garden. And you can see there's a climbing rose over there. And if you turn to the right, on the tree, there is some copper, a container, and a mirror there. My great aunt had a mirror in her garden. I always wanted a mirror in my garden. And over here, you can see some aucuba, and above it, some rhododendron. You can tell from the spent blossoms, it must have been covered in a stone sink. And down low here, some rose campion, some feverfew. And I'm not sure if that's like some allium seed heads, but she's gotten some pine cones and maybe some allium seed heads to give it a little dimension there. And here's the working garden, and she's getting things a little bit bigger. Now, when she's going to line that hammock, I do not know, because this is obviously a working spot. And back here are the seeds with a little bit of gravel on top of them. Again, she said that helped them to sprout. I'm going to have to get myself some pea gravel to do that. But that looks like garbage on the right, but every gardener knows you save all those little things and you plant in them. She offered me some on the way out, and I said, my husband already thinks I have too much. But here are some daylilies that are still blooming. This is her castle garden. I know that looks like boxwood, but that is an ivy. That is a holly, and you have some pencil holly coming up on the top of it. I guess that creates the crenellations like on a castle. So a very formal area. There's those pencil hollies sticking up. And this is kind of the far side of the cutting garden. And we've looked at this before. There's a little columbine blooming and some baptisia. So again, that would have been much earlier. That would have been very beautiful, things blooming. But now it's too shady. Nobody wants to bloom. And this is looking into the cutting garden, which I showed you 2 weeks ago, and it is even more magnificent. The cosmos are really in bloom, and the yellow flowers down there, the tall yellow flowers, are gladiolas, and then of course we have the rudbeckia, and the dahlias are beginning to bloom. And in the front, before you go in, I called attention last time to these gladiolas that were not blooming, and I looked at these and I was like, that's not a gladiola. And Jenny corrected me. She said, yes, that is a gladiola. I think the scientific name is Gladiola muriella. And I had never seen that. Just beautiful. That looks like maybe there's the thalectrum, the meadow rue, and there continues to be the garden phlox and some anise hyssop. And you can see the leaves from the peonies. This is very much a peony bed. There are the beautiful pink dahlias beginning to bloom. I can see there were lilies earlier in the summer too. And there are more of those beautiful gladiolas. She calls this the book garden, so I think she plants things for her books, and she's been working on a book on bulbs that will be coming out probably next year, and I'm sure that's why those beautiful gladiolas got planted. I don't think they would survive a zone 6 winter, but we'll find out next year. You can see the gladiolas. The red on the right is the scarlet honeysuckle, and those gladiolas were not blooming 2 weeks ago. Now they're really taking off. And the dahlias and the celosia blooming, and such a pretty view. Now I asked Jenny, am I missing any of the water features? And she said, oh yeah, you've missed this one. This sounds to me like something cooking and on full boil. And just the floating balls and the little noise it makes. Now, this is lycoris, and the lycoris was just getting ready to bloom when I left home 2 weeks ago. I said to my husband, be sure to take pictures, which I'm sure he did not. But I knew exactly what this was. It always blooms in August for me, in early August. And Jenny's is blooming just a week or so behind mine. But she made a noise, and these are bulb plants also, because this is a lycoris also. And it's very unusual with this beautiful blue color. So you're going to see a hand in a second. That's Jenny's hand. She's planning on taking pictures this very day of the lycoris. So I'm sure that'll show up in her book. She does all the photography for her books, including Glorious Shade, that I'm totally dependent on, and The Ultimate Flower Gardener's Guide, my new obsession. Now, in the description below, I have links to both these books and her website, where you can see more of her gardens, sign up for her free monthly email, or contact her for a lecture or a tour of Northview, her gardens, for your gardening group. I heard about Jenny Rose from Laura on Garden Answer. She is internationally respected. It's an honor for me to be able to document her garden, and I have hardly scratched the surface. A tremendous thank you to Jenny Rose. Now, if you've made it this far, I have a small request. Would you let me know in the comments how often you would like to see her gardens? If I lived closer, I would go over multiple times a week. As it is, I'm a 2.5 to 3 hour drive away, so I'm thinking every 2 or 3 weeks during the growing season. Would you want to see that? Now, after she finishes this current book, I'm going to teach her how to do a YouTube channel. She was an adjunct professor at Temple University and has so much knowledge, the perfect intersection of English and American gardening. Thank you so much for watching. I have wonderful viewers and I really appreciate you. See you next time.